I want to bring up here Mitchell Cohen, who is the coordinator of the No Spray Coalition, www.nospray.org. I believe pesticides is what that refers to. And he is the coordinator of the New York State Green Party. Mitchell Cohen.
Co-coordinator of the New York State Green Party. We have several. So, speaking of impeachment, I know that we all know the song that we can do together, the theme song to the impeachment movement. You know it as well as I do. We taught it as kids, but we didn't know what it was about. So perhaps we could sing it together right now. It's called Rockabye Baby. And let's sing it together, and then I'll fill you in on what it's about. So, go with Rockabye Baby. When the wind blows, the cradle will rock. When the bough breaks, the cradle will fall. And now will come baby, cradle and all.
This would be good to film.
That song was written during the American Revolution. It was about King George III of England, and it applies as much to King George today. His cradle was the throne. And that's what that song is about. That's what we were taught, and we never knew it. I like to think of Steve Biko, who was one of my heroes, who died in South Africa, killed by U.S. cattle prods, that cattle prodded him to death, and others, as he was chained in his dungeon cell in South Africa. And his famous quote that I always like to use is, "The most potent weapon in the hands of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed." And I like to think that when I realize that this country is not a democracy now, it wasn't a democracy 50 years ago, or for the past 50 years, and in fact, this country was never a democracy. So when we think of what is democracy, it's not the United States. In fact, it goes all the way back to, I'd say, to Christopher Columbus when he landed here. And this is what Christopher Columbus wrote in his own diary, in his log. You can find it in Howard Zinn's book, as well as many others. The native people brought us parrots, and this is what Columbus wrote, parrots and balls of cotton and spears, which they exchanged for glass beads and hawks' bells. They willingly traded everything they owned. They were well built with good bodies and handsome features. They do not bear arms, and they don't know them, for I showed them a sword. They took it by the edge and cut themselves out of ignorance. They have no iron. Their spears are made of cane. They would make fine servants. With 50 men, we could subjugate them all and make them do whatever we want. That's the discoverer. That's when the native people discovered Christopher Columbus on their beach. Think of the word revolution. Think of it spelled out. And then phonetically spell it backwards. I might take a little exercise. Know it, you lover. That's right. Know it, you lover. That's what revolution, to me, is partly about. Although this country was never a democracy, that doesn't mean that weren't people fighting throughout our history to make it a democracy. People whose efforts bubbled up into eruptions throughout history from the various rebellions that happened throughout the colonial ages to today as well. And I'd like to give some examples of what some folks are doing today in a creative way. But for me, a revolution is partly about the bubbling up of those efforts and crystallizing them into permanent institutions of resistance and nurturance through which we both resist and nurture each other in a way through all sorts of issues, through all sorts, the whole array of daily life that we are facing and that we live through, whether it's in terms of medical care or food or whatever the issue might be. People are making things happen in that way that are being opposed by the forces of the government, whether it's the Black Panthers Breakfast for Children program that was crushed by the government in many places, where they're feeding people, to many, many, many different instances, and trying to create those institutions. And then as those institutions get larger and larger, they become institutions of dual power. They become an opposition movement within the current setup, the current framework. And then the fight, the revolution, is to make those institutions the society, to expand them so that they become the entire society. So there's a way in which we can conceive of revolution outside of the structures that exist today, outside of even the electoral structures, even with great people running. And I support Cindy, and I support what everybody here has said, but there's a different process at work. So I wanted to give a couple of examples of what some people have been doing to make that happen. This is a badge I sometimes wear when it's convenient. It's the FDA. It means for direct action. And it was put out, and this badge was made, and you can see the picture here of me and, or whoever it was in a radiation suit. So everybody wore the same badge with the same picture on it. And we'll come into play why that's humorous but also important in a minute. This was used in Northampton, Massachusetts in the fight against genetic engineering. And a large group of people made up these badges, and they all wore them. And they went into supermarkets with Geiger counters. And they put the Geiger counters up against the genetically engineered fruits and vegetables, and the corn and the soybeans. And somehow they made the Geiger counter start clicking, as if you could measure that in that way. Anyway, and they made it click, and they were all wearing radiation suits as well. And they said, well, you have to shut down the store until you get rid of this genetic engineering, because you can hear it. You're not allowed to have this. And blah, blah, blah. And who are you? Well, here's our official badge from the FDA. And well, how do we know it's you? Well, here's my picture. And they shut down 3 or 4 large supermarkets, succeeded in doing that. So that was one effort, and that expanded into a much larger movement, but that was one of the first actions of its type about genetic engineering in the U.S. Another example, here, right next door in Tennessee, a group of people decided to write their own law book, and they took what looked like a McKinney's law book with the black cover and the gold emboldened letters on it, and they went to similar supermarkets, but they wrote their own law book. So they typed in their own laws, and they put that and they glued it in so it looked real on top of the regular law book. And then they went to places with the law book, and they did the same thing. They went and you have to shut down this market if you're going to have genetically engineered material in it and sell this material. And they shut down something like 14 different supermarkets because people would come, the manager would come and say, what do you mean? It's not against the law to sell genetically engineered food. So they'd open the law book and say, oh yeah, right there, it's the law. And they show them the law, and they shut down those markets until they got rid of, and then they got run out of the state when people caught on. So those are some creative examples. Another example that we could do, in the 60s we used to shut down buildings to protest various things. Now we can start opening them up. It looks the same, because they're shutting down. Where they try to shut down libraries, and go in, take them over, open them up. And say, this is available for people. When they try to shut down hospitals, we go in, sit in, open them up so people could use it. Looks exactly the same, except everybody supports it, right? So that's one tactic that some people have been using lately. Another, of course, is the longshore workers in California. Just 3 weeks ago, longshore workers organized for the first time in recent history to do a political strike against the war, and they shut down the whole coast to exporting and importing the entire coast. Now imagine what would happen if that gets extended against the war. What effort it took. And I was told by people that there were people who were not necessarily on the left who were part of that, but they were sick of the war. So that's great. Being involved in the action is transformative. You take part, and now all those people want to know what they're going to do next. Imagine if working class people saw it as our part of what we were allowed to do, to take political action on what are normally considered solely economic issues. For instance, in New York, we had General Electric poisoning the Hudson River with PCBs for years and years. Imagine if the workers at the General Electric plant saw it as within our capacity to demand, as part of our negotiations for a contract, to say, no, we're not going to let you poison the river. We demand, and we make this list of political demands as part of our contract negotiation. That hadn't been allowed since the 1935 National Labor Relations Act, and since that's all being junked now anyway, there is no more social contract, everything's up in the air, and people can start making these demands, or making these sort of demands around mortgage issues, about the evictions. Where's the no evictions movement in this country? People here started talking about helping to create one with Susan Brown, I think, was going to help coordinate something like that. Ellen Brown, sorry, around that here. That's one important, really important thing to come out of this conference. And it could have tremendous impact all over the country. The idea of direct action, people, different than making a demand alone. Food Not Bombs is not only demanding that the government provide food for people, but in the interim, we're going to do it ourselves. We're going to have to figure out ways of taking on the things that we are demanding and making them happen now. So it's not only making a demand, oh please, a little more porridge to the government, but we're going to do it. We're going to figure out ways in which we can put into practice that which we're demanding of the government, and doing that now. There are all sorts of different types of ways of doing this, some more political, some just cultural. I had part of a group of friends I was part of. We took over one of the early shopping malls in New York. And we took over where you come in from where you park the cars, the parking lot, into the elevators to go into the mall. And we set one of the elevators up as a shower. Just a shower. There was no political demand that was assigned to that. It was just that when people came from their cars, there was a long line of people dressed in towels and no other clothes waiting in line to take the shower. And when the doors opened to the elevator, we had a shower set up with a tape recorder, and it would sound like water, and there'd be somebody in there soaked up. And this jolted the reality of people. It played with that reality and created a break. It was we used to call it a situationist type of approach. So most people, with their families to shop and everything, they didn't know what to do. They just went, oh, excuse me, and they went to the next elevator, which we had set up as a restaurant. Using humor to make it seem that we're not serious. In fact, just the opposite. Sometimes the humor opens up space that no other way opens up. Now, I wanted to switch gears just for a second here and show you a couple of ads. These are real ads, not phony ads, from business newspapers from the 1990s, to give you an idea of what we're up against. This one says, this was in the Apparel Industry magazine, working to make your business work. Working to make your business work. 56 cents an hour is only one reason you should come to the Dominican Republic. Right? These are businesses talking to other businesses for investment. It says more garments are produced or assembled in the Dominican Republic for U.S. manufacturers and retailers than in any other CBI country, that's Caribbean Basin Initiative country. Over 50% more than the next largest source, for good reason. And it goes through that you get cheaper labor, there's good police to police the labor, that they don't have unions, and they actually sell it. This is the selling point. Right? Or I'll give another one, just so you know this is not, and this is what goes on all over the world. Here's one. I can't fight East labor costs in North America. And it goes, yes you can, come to Yucatan. And this was before NAFTA, where labor costs average under $1 an hour, including benefits. Far less than in the Far East, and less than CBI, Central America, and even less than the rest of Mexico. And they talk about the employer turnover rate is less than 5% a year, and we are only 460 miles and 90 minutes by air from the U.S. And you could save over $15,000 a year per worker if you had an offshore production plant here, and so on. And they even give the phone number to call. So that's another example. And there are a bunch of them. similar one, another Yucatan one. There's no way I can get my labor costs down to $1 an hour. Yes, you can, Yucatan. Or one more that I have about the Caribbean Basin Initiative, the Monte Cristi Corporation, the Caribbean Basin International Development Zone, binational project of the Dominican Republic and Haiti, with international support, is patterned after the successful Hong Kong industrial area of the Far East. And it goes why you should invest in Haiti or in various regions, and it gives you why you can do that. Duty-free import of raw materials, tax-free export of finished products, favorable utility rates, unions non-existent, low cost of land and construction, and so forth. And so this is the face of imperialism. This is why the U.S. military is in all these other places. It's to protect the interests of the corporate elite, what we call the ruling class in this country, and believe that only through a revolutionary movement in which the ruling class of this country is removed from power by, as Malcolm said, by any means necessary, preferably nonviolent means, but they're not going to go down nonviolently. Things are going to happen no matter how nonviolent we may be. People are going to be taking actions to protect their lives, to protect their jobs and their families and their incomes. And then we're going to have choices to make about whether we're going to support that or not and involve ourselves with that or not. So I see the violence versus nonviolence debate that's happened sometimes is not, I wouldn't say it's a phony debate, it's an artificial debate. Because things are going to happen regardless of what we're debating. And we're going to need to make choices about how we're going to move in this world to get rid of the real force of violence in this world. And so when we talk about, when we talk about real democracy and wanting real democracy, I'm for that. And so are we all. So let's let the entire world who are impacted by the policies of this U.S. government, let the entire world vote on who the next president should be of the United States, whether they want these to have to live under these conditions. That'll be democracy, but let's not bullshit about it. If we're really for democracy, then open it up and make it real. Thanks.
Thank you, Mitch. How many people saw a movie by Michael Moore called Sicko? Our next speaker was one of the important people who appeared in that movie. Donna Smith is a writer, a blogger, a full-time advocate for universal health care. She blogs on Michael Moore's website and on Huffington Post, among other places. Please welcome Donna Smith.
Wow, what wonderful speakers, huh? Amazing. Can you hear me okay? Is it working? Wow. Cindy Sheehan's here on this panel, this awesome panel. This is a woman and a mom with whom I've shared so much as we've appeared on web space and in cyberspace together, but never met until today. I'm so sorry, Cindy, for the loss of Casey. But I'm so joyful with you for the welcome of baby Jonah into the world. And I'm so grateful to you for your continuing heroism on my behalf and on behalf of all the mothers and sons and fathers and daughters in this world. Blessings to you. And I know I've already held her feet to the fire on this. When we elect her to Congress, my mother will be one of the voters, I hope, for her. I'm not sure I can pull my brother into your camp, but I'll sure give it a whirl. She's going to be one of our co-sponsors of H.R. 676, which is the National Health Insurance Act that was put forward by John Conyers, and it already has 90 co-sponsors. We don't need to reinvent the wheel with health care. So, good afternoon, my fellow revolutionaries.
Hey, hey! Yeah. Damn right.
I bring you glad tidings from your fellow citizens. Over the past 9 months, I have visited 27 states and the District of Columbia, spreading the single-payer universal health care message. And I can tell you without a doubt, and Garda, are you listening? The revolution has begun. In some places, they're just seedlings, popping gently but with determination. In South Dakota, in Mississippi, in West Virginia, in North Carolina, and in D.C., and even in Cheney's, Wyoming. In other places, saplings are more steady and beginning to bear witness that will soon hold the steady branches of real change. In Indiana, Pennsylvania, California, Washington State, Illinois, Tennessee, Kentucky, and Alabama. Even Utah, Colorado, New York, and Maryland. And Florida, Katrina-ravaged Louisiana, Georgia, South Carolina, Massachusetts, Delaware, Minnesota, Missouri, New Jersey, and now right here in Virginia. These people of the revolution are gathered, and they are speaking, and they are planning the next actions, the next protests, the stuff of people on a mission. And the voices are growing, and the tide is rising. And they look to us, yes, to us, the revolutionary speakers, to help provide the passion and the fuel necessary to inspire their work and to continue moving forward. The noise of discontent must blossom and mature. And to the extent that each of us here, engineers of revolution in thought, in action, and in art, inspire and conspire with one another and all of our fellow citizens, the revolution will come. The noise will grow deafening until those who repress us all in so many ways are toppled from within and from without.
Yeah.
Are there any other graduates, college graduates in the room today who graduated with Phi Beta Kappa honors? Anybody here? I ask you that because when I was honored with Phi Beta Kappa honors, I was raising 6 children and went back to college, thank God, and got my degree. I was taught a secret handshake that the revolutionary pre-presidential Thomas Jefferson and other revolutionaries of his time were taught and they used to safely identify one another in crowds so they could come together and talk and think and plan. And with that lesson came the knowledge that this nation is still most assuredly subject to conditions that require, that compel, and that demand not secrecy, but loyalty to one another as revolutionaries and to the causes for which we would still die. For me, that cause is universal health care, a basic human right for all of us. And make no mistake about this, I am a patriot in the most sincere and revolutionary tradition of my great foremothers and forefathers. Cindy and I know as history majors, we didn't learn near enough about our foremothers. On November 19th, 1864, November 19th is my birthday, so I have some affinity for that date. Abraham Lincoln said, 77 years ago, our fathers set forth upon this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. No matter what his reasons for those words, no matter what the misguided intentions of war have been, I am still going to hold him to that truth. I'm holding you to that promise. And I'm holding my nation to the higher purpose that uplifts and empowers every human being on this planet. The new code word for the revolution, we don't need a secret handshake. The new code word is Radford. Radford! Revolutionaries, and say it to one another to identify yourselves. I am a Radford revolutionary. And onward, let's shake the world. Thank you.
Wonderful idea. We're going to have questions and answers. A couple of quick announcements. One is if you leave when this is over, come back really fast because there's going to be a panel at 4 o'clock on our constitutional rights and civil liberties in this room, and we don't have many of them left. So the other important announcement, for $1 you can get one of these wonderful Impeach Bush and Cheney bracelets. Take one out of the bag and put $1 in. Steve, I wished we could include you on the panel, but we have a lot of great speakers, so let me go to you for the first question.
Thank you. It's been a great panel. I just want to talk briefly about some of the ideas that have inspired mass movements in this country in the past. And one that most of us don't know about is the movement for economic security. I'm Steve Schafferman with Citizen Policies Advocates, and my new book is Peaceful Positive Revolution. One of the things that sparked the progressive and populist movements in the 1890s was the work of Henry George and Edward Bellamy, saying that everyone should have economic security as a right. Something that gave us social security in 1935, and that helped spark all of the reforms that came in those periods were the Townsend Plan movement and Huey Long's movement for guaranteed economic security. In the 1960s, the idea of a guaranteed income was so mainstream that a guaranteed income plan passed in the House of Representatives by 2/3 of the vote. It was narrowly defeated in the Senate through the political maneuvers where the extreme conservatives delayed things and the extreme liberals opposed it because they wanted something more generous. I ask us all to think about what is the most effective thing that we can do as we leave here and say the word Radford to one another to build our movement. What is the most effective thing we can do to recruit ordinary Americans who today are so depoliticized and are so struggling to pay their bills? And I suggest to you that it is to talk to them about economic security. Talk to them about the idea of a guaranteed basic income. Say, would you like $800 a month tax-free? Let us give that to every U.S. citizen as a right so that we can all afford to participate as citizens in demanding ecological justice, in demanding social justice, in taking back our government from the corporations and the military. And I'll be talking more about this in my workshop. I'd love to hear all of you talk about the ideas of economic security, and Cindy's mentioned it a little bit, Martin Luther King talked about it, David quoted from his speech. So thank you all. Thank you all.
Thanks, Steve. Cindy or anyone else, did you want to reply to that? Got any more questions? Garda, you have a question?
Stand up, take a microphone. Stand up and take a microphone, please.
Just do it.
Go ahead, we'll repeat the question.
Go ahead, we'll repeat it for you.
So the question was, what if you have a basic income, but the cost of living keeps shooting up, and it, like the minimum wage, it effectively plummets, and so tie it to the cost of living. I assume Steve, what do you? Yeah.
Tie it to the cost of living. I actually use the term citizen dividends. And of course, we tie it to the cost of living in relation to purchasing capacity. It's a start, but not an end.
Economic justice certainly has to be part of the agenda for revolutionary evolution. And one plan I like that I like to look forward is the idea of a wealth tax. And what I would say would be the first $100,000 of income tax-free, no federal tax, and replace that with a tiny, minute tax on the purchase of stocks, bonds, securities, derivatives. A 0.1% tax, 0.1% tax, will raise 3 times as much money as taxing the first $100,000 of income. A 0.1% tax on stocks, bonds, securities, derivatives, purchase of, like when you buy a shirt, or buy food, or buy a car, you pay a tax. When you buy stocks, bonds, securities, derivatives, you don't pay a tax. And so a tiny 0.1% tax would raise 3 times as much money as we currently raise from the tax of the first $100,000 of income. That shows you the wealth divide. The reason that's true is because there's so much money traded, especially in derivatives, options, and that kind of thing. There's so much money traded in that now. It's in the trillions of dollars. It's gigantic amounts of money. And a small tax on that could replace the income tax.
So we're right here in the front row and then back over here.
I'd like to describe to my fellow attendees this schizophrenia that I'm kind of experiencing during this conference. To some extent, we're all sort of very encouraged by discussions of these simple changes that could be implemented. I mean, take Kevin's example, last example. I suggest we're not getting any of that. We're not getting any of that unless the fundamental power relations change. The other side of this schizoid experience I'm having, this understanding that was up front in this conference, I was pleased to see. We've got gangsters running this show. They're not about to be, quote, persuaded, unquote. I think we all know that. And then we get this sort of ambiguous talk. I think the UK is as close as anyone, sort of talking about violence and other violence. It made me think of what Lynn Stewart said the first night. When suddenly in the middle of her speech, I don't know if she's here now, she started talking about self-defense. And this sense among us that they're going to bring it to us. This sense among us that they are going to bring it to us.
Anybody want to comment on that?
Yes, I'd like to comment.
Listen, can we ask the... Okay, go ahead.
He's excited, go.
Yes. One point. One of the things, I respect everything you said, but it's very important to understand that many of us have been there for 45 years. But what we are doing here is trying to get reasons to enlist as many other people in this country as possible. Very, to make people understand how easy it would be to make a change. Everybody doesn't start off with, give me the gun. People start off with, hey, if we could just get that done, maybe we could change this country. And that when they say that, they say, maybe that guy with the gun's doing the right thing. So we have to give people reason, and all of these speakers out there are giving the rest of the people in America reason to join or to stand up when they bring it take it back to them. And you have to understand that. I don't want to talk nice, but I talk nice all the time because people don't hear me when I talk the other way. So they're talking very nice. I understand perfectly. I'm with it. Do it. Don't hear me sit. Serious business, and we will get people out to vote, and we will get people to do a lot of things. Many years I've been saying, vote don't bother me. I realize that we have to say vote. The beauty of Obama, as Lynn says, what happens when the people find out they've been fooled? This is important. Many people have to go through the process. One of the things that happened when Obama ran, I said, the man, I bet he gets 95% of the black women vote. I'm not the anti-black women. And I know I'm going to work like hell to get them to vote for Cynthia, but the ones who do vote for Obama, it's going to be an out there question. Maybe we can get him the next time. You see what I'm saying? So don't be discouraged when people talk about it. Yes, talk about it. We have to come out with all of the programs. And I would love to see this thing, everything here, videotaped, so that we can educate. There was more education that went on this weekend than most of the universities in the country in all 4 years. Don't overlook it. Very important.
Panelists want to reply to that before we go to the next question.
I do want to comment on that.
Yeah, look me up, my friend.
We were the last industrial country to do away with slavery. And we did away with it with a bloody revolution. And that wasn't even the purpose of the Civil War. You know, the abolition of slavery didn't even come until January 1863 with the Emancipation Proclamation. Well, the states that were in rebellion didn't pay attention to the Emancipation Proclamation that Lincoln wrote. Every other industrial country did away with slavery without violence. Okay, there's a sister here who is a Presbyterian chaplain for Virginia Tech. Why do we always think that we have to use violence to solve problems? Okay, I am for the Constitution. Not really, I think that, but it is our document that we have to start with. I am not for an unfettered Second Amendment right to own guns. I think that we have to have strict guidelines to let people, I mean, it makes sense to have people go through a mental screening and a screening that they haven't been previously violent. Another great Michael Moore movie is Bowling for Columbine. Why does the United States have the highest amount put together of people who are murdered by handguns of all the other countries put together? Amen. There was a nonviolent revolution. Gandhi had an insurgency of nonviolence and kicked the British Empire out of India. So why? It's up to you. If they come and get you, if you want to use violence, that's up to you. But when they come and get me, I'm not going to resort or stoop down to the gutter that the U.S. military, industrial, prison, congressional complex is in. I will not be in their gutter with them. But it's up to you. If you want to choose to use violence, that's I guess, your thing. And we do all have, I think that we have the right, if California wants to secede from the Union, I think we have the right to peaceably do that. I think we have the right to peaceably do our own things in our own communities without the federal government's interference. But I choose as myself, and the only reason I would ever use violence is if somebody came after one of my children or my grandchild now. So that's just, and I'm just saying, we are going to perpetuate the system if we choose to solve our problems violently. And I apologize to my brothers here. I don't really like the term patriotism. I like the term matriotism. And you can be a male and be a matriot, but that is somebody who loves all humanity and who does not send her children to kill other people's children. And a matriot does not resort to violence to solve problems.
Let me speak first, and then we can
go ahead.
I'm answering the question that were asked. When I was 15 years old and my brother was 13, we wrote a letter to then President Lyndon Johnson saying that, maybe you don't understand this horror that you're committing in Vietnam, that we saw it when we were kids. You probably don't understand it, so we want to urge you to, vote against the war or to pull the troops out and so forth. And we actually got a letter back at that time from the State Department. It didn't go to Johnson, but from the State Department. I have it somewhere at home saying that, thank you for your concerns and your issues, and we'll pass along this information to the President, and we'll keep your name on file for future reference. And ever since then, they did that. So I think one of the beauties of this conference is that we have here the opportunity, and we've been doing this, to reframe the way the issues are being presented and the solutions that are being offered to those issues, both in the media, by those in power, by the corporations, and so forth, just all around, and by the left, and by ourselves, the way in which these issues are going forth. There is no homeless. It's not that people are homeless in the United States. It's that people are made homeless. There's a verb missing. It's not that people are losing their homes. Oh, I lost it. Where did I put it? It's people's homes are being stolen from them. And it's not that workers are receiving low wages. It's that workers are not being paid the full value for what it is that we produce. So all of those, it takes an enormous amount of systemic violence to keep all of those in place, to make people homeless, to take away their homes, to take away the labor from people and to use it the way you want afterwards. That's an enormous amount of systemic violence, and yet we take that for normal. This is the craziness, the schizophrenia that you point to, that we're in every day of our lives. It takes an enormous amount of violence that the shirts that we wear, for the most part, are made by people who are dying of brown lung and being paid slave wages in Haiti or in North Carolina or wherever they may be. All this is part of our everyday lives, and it's violence all around us every day, and we don't see it because this is the way it's set up. And maybe we do see it from time to time, and we have to figure out how to deal with that. So when we're talking about people breaking out of that, we have to keep in mind the huge amount of violence, the systemic violence that it takes to do that. And I agree with Cindy that none of us are violent people. None of us want to see violence. And it depends how we define it. None of us have even the power to commit the kind of violence that the system is using to keep us in this place where we are.
I'm afraid we might see some if we don't give some people a chance to ask their questions. So we have under 5 minutes. I want to get at least 2 questions in from the gentleman. I promised a question in from the gentleman who's going to have a heart attack. He doesn't get a chance to ask his question. And you'll be number 3 if we have time. So let's see how fast these guys are.
I have a general question. I'd like to pick up on a couple of comments that have been made by the panelists. But I'd like to first pull a trick from our esteemed congressman and yield a minute of my time to Ms. Lynn Stewart because she is directly involved in what has been said about the question of violence and nonviolence. So Lynn.
Go, Lynn.
I think that we as a movement have to adopt each other's virtues in the sense that Cindy and I have been close since she was hanging out at San Francisco State, and so was I in a small classroom that held about 30 people. But I want to say that when Cindy says that using violence is stupid, I don't think she really means that. Nelson Mandela did never stoop to anyone. Nelson Mandela would not give up the right of the people to fight back. He refused to leave jail unless the South African government, they tried to make him repudiate violence. That's their word, violence. Our word is resistance and self-defense. Just like I respect Mahatma Gandhi. It's not my way. If they come kicking my door, I'm going to be sitting there with a shotgun. I don't respect. I think we have to be resistant in the way that we say my life or yours, because that's all they understand. There have been came in, they fought for their people. They didn't fight meaningless wars of aggression and looting. They fought to save their people. Now Zedong. Whoever thought that China would ever be a world power? They said the peasant will never rise. Well, Mao led them, and they rose, and look at them. So I just say to you, I respect your way of doing it. Please respect my way of doing it. It's more dangerous, but I think it's right. And I think the fact that we've repudiated, we let them think, oh God, if we say, well, I don't know if we're bad people. Boy, I don't think Sam Adams thought that. I don't think Thomas Jefferson thought that.
So we have under 1 minute for the next two questions that we were doing. So
just super quick, I have to drag this from David. You know, I'm not against resistance. I'm all for resistance. I've been dragged by NYPD, and I've been in jail for justice, and, you know, I think that is cool. But and revolutions can be good also. But we had a bloody revolution, we have a bloody society. China had a bloody revolution, they have a bloody society. I'm just saying that we need to gather together, and we need to urge our leaders, because like Martin Luther King Jr. said, the greatest purveyor of violence today is my own government. And that's what I want to encourage, is how do we solve problems? And, you know, when somebody breaks into your house with a shotgun, that's not a negotiable problem that you can solve and sit down and say, you know, let's sit down at the table and let's see if we can solve this nonviolently. That's a reaction, and I respect that reaction. And there's some things where you have to have a reaction like that. But if they're, instead of like, what I'm talking about, instead of saying, let's obliterate Iran without sitting down and going through, I mean, never obliterate Iran, no matter if we sit down, no matter how long we talk to them, let's not ever obliterate Iran. And how can we do that? You know, there are emergencies that need to be addressed, but they're in the long term, and I understand the struggle. I understand the struggle, and I understand resistance, and there's different forms of resistance. But just to our leaders who use violence as a first resort, I don't agree with at all.
go, fast.
Thank you. Thank you all for your wonderful contributions. My question picks up on a point that Mitchell made. Let the world vote in our elections, because our democracy is about their democracy. It's world democracy, just that it's a world empire, it's a world democracy. You have to start thinking in those terms. And it's a world revolution. And my question is, how can we internationalize what we're doing here this weekend? How do we internationalize? How do we turn the impeachment movement in the USA into an international movement to bring the war criminals to trial in The Hague and at the World Court? How do we bring our European leftist brothers and sisters into our discussions today?
Good question. Good question. Let's get a second question.
I would love to build on that, and I concur fully that we are now a small world, and we have to learn how to resolve problems as a family. But I want to speak to the issue of violence and nonviolence. I've lived in the Appalachian region for 50 years now, and I remember statistics that came out in the newspaper, the Roanoke newspaper, in 1969, that in the 9 far western counties of Virginia alone, more deaths were inflicted by guns than in all of Japan and all of England, in those two countries, in half a year. No. In the full year on those two countries and only half a year in the 9 counties in Virginia. I live in a region where the people have been oppressed by the most vicious corporate entities in this country. And the people have felt that their only recourse has been to resort to violence against violence. And I understand that. But in the Pittston strike, back in the late 80s, I was at a rally of 10,000 miners when Cesar Chavez on the 4th of July spoke to them. And he said something to try to reinforce their commitment to nonviolence in that strike, which was the first time that they ever gave themselves to nonviolence. And he said that nonviolence is essential because violence, if you resort to violence, it eschews the issue that you are trying to focus on and to carry forward. And secondly, he said, it is right, nonviolence is right because it brings together friends, allies, from sources you never expect.
Hear, hear.
And then third, he said it is right because it is the way of God. And I believe that. I understand violence. I have lived with people who have been violated to the point in which rage results in violence. But it has not accomplished anything for them.
Thank you very, very much for saying that. I have to add that any self-respecting nation around the world that had moved a few percentage points, a fraction of the way down the road that we have in Washington in recent years, would have long since non-violently taken over the Capitol and shut it down. And that a few percent of the people who believe their civic duty to be voting were to devote a couple of days to this project. If a few percentage points of the amount of money we give to candidates in an election as our civic duty were given to restoring our democracy and getting rid of elected despots in between elections, we would have everything we're dreaming of. It's not hard. It's not hard at all. It's just hard for Americans, and we have to wake up and do it. So if we sit back and wait and let it get worse and worse and then say, well, now they've brought violence to us, we must pull out our guns, we're behaving the way they do. We're behaving the way they do. And we have no right to do that. So thank you for your comments.
Just another comment. This is going to seem like a contradiction, and it might be. But we're occupying a country illegally and immorally. We are breaking down people's doors, the U.S. military. We are dropping bombs from airplanes. I call George Bush the biggest terrorist in the world. I've gotten a lot of heat from that. But I say, what's the difference between firing airplanes into buildings or dropping bombs from airplanes onto buildings? There's no difference. My son was killed in the Iraqi resistance. But I recognize their right to resist. Of course, I wish that there didn't need to be that resistance. But they're being occupied. We are occupiers. And they're trying to force the occupation out of their country like we had an insurgency back in 1776. And if our country wasn't so violent in this imperial war for greed, for power, for hegemony, then the Iraqi people would not have to react like they react. So there is a legitimate, even in a moral war theory, which I think is a contradiction in terms, you have the right to resist and to protect yourself and the right to self-defense. So I was just saying that I would not, at that point, do that. but you do have the moral right of self-defense.
This discussion can be continued informally and in a panel that begins in this room in 5 minutes that will continue, in fact, this discussion. Thank you to all of these panelists and to all of you for coming.